Today on CityCast DC, the Petworth Peanuts chat group is a place for people to commiserate about parenting, get doctor recommendations, and meet up for beers. At its peak, 1,000 members were signed up for tips and thoughts about parenting in DC. And then someone posted about Gaza. The Washington Post's Maura Judkis was a member, and she's just published an essay chronicling the meltdown that followed, and along the way, asking whether even something so simple as a parenting group chat has to be so fraught in the DC of 2026. Today is Thursday, March 5th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Maura, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So you wrote this amazing story in the Post about a group chat gone wrong. And as it happens, you are part of this group chat.
Yes, it was really quite dramatic as it all unfurled.
All right, so back us up. What's the group chat? Why were you part of it?
Sure. So it's a group called Petworth Peanuts, and it's a new parent group that I joined when my daughter was born in 2022. And it's like, they do all the new parent stuff. It's like meetups for people who are on maternity leave or parental leave. They do kids events, like they throw this massive Halloween party. They throw a big Christmas party. They host Q&As with lactation consultants or people who are behavioral experts for children. But it turned very dramatic when some members of the group decided that maybe it should take on some additional responsibilities as well.
All right. So in general, group chats about new mom meetups and lactation consultants, not typically a hotbed of controversy. You said there were about 1,000 people who were part of this chat, and everything is trundling along. You're type A DC new parents. And then someone brings up Gaza.
And so then some members of the group said, you should write in Gaza, or they talked about the uncommitted movement. And then the leader of this group chimed in and said, hey, guys, this isn't a space for politics. So if you want to talk about that, great. But you should create a side channel that's unaffiliated with this. And so they did. And they started this group called Free Range, where they started talking about advocacy. But then it also kind of broadened to include these other generic parenting inquiries too, like, what kind of formula is the best formula, or who has advice on sippy cups or kids dance instructors, things like that.
All right. So I don't understand why the founders of the group or the leaders of the group were so exercised about just one person asking about ways of helping Gaza, even if it may be a little bit off topic for a typical fare on the Petworth Peanuts parent group chat.
Yeah, so part of it, and something that they cited several times throughout this entire ordeal, which lasted quite a while, is that they formalized into a 501c3. And so because of that, they felt like they did not, a 501c3 can't support certain candidates. They sort of extrapolated that to include no political advocacy of any sort. And so that was what they cited initially. And they, again, were very welcoming of people doing that, just not in this space. They said, you can make your own channel for that.
All right, but this is not really about the technicalities of 501c3 tax law.
That is what they initially cited at first, but eventually everyone came to understand that this was also about upholding boundaries of what this space could and should be. And so, the thing that is often cited in a lot of parenting spaces is the notion that parenting is political. And, when people say parenting is political, what does that mean? It's a very difficult question to answer, and people feel very strongly about it in certain ways. And so for one faction of this group, they felt like parenting is political means that these spaces, these parent spaces, because parenting is political, these spaces can and should be politicized. And then another faction of the group felt like we can have a separation between our parent spaces and our political spaces because this group was initially founded for support of parents. It was founded to help people make friends while they're on maternity leave. It was founded to help connect people with resources like lactation consultants or recommending schools, helping people navigate the school choice process in DC. The way that it came down for them was that, when we talk about parenting being politicized, We want it to be directly related to things in our neighborhood group. And so that was the initial reaction of how to exclude conversations about Gaza. Where it got very tricky talking about the politicization of this group and of parenting is when the National Guard came into DC. That was the real flashpoint, because there we have an issue that's highly political and is also directly affecting this neighborhood and affecting immigrant families in this neighborhood. And so a faction of this group said that they were hoping that the group could become more of an advocacy organization to do know your rights trainings, to intervene on behalf of neighbors who were perhaps being targeted at checkpoints, to do more for the immigrant neighbors in this gentrified neighborhood. And that is where they began to draw the line, really, was that this cannot become a political organization. We want this to be an organization that is about support for our neighbors. But then, what does support for our neighbors mean? This is where it got very sticky.
I'm exhausted just listening to you. I mean, this whole thing feels like this is why we can't have nice things. You join this parenting group, 1,000 people mostly in your neighborhood, Petworth, do the same. And it devolves into this sort of angry argument about like philosophical questions about what does parenting mean and what does political mean and so on. And in the meantime, you in your piece, you chronicle these insane back and forths that, again, without adjudicating who's right or who's wrong, it feels like you're arguing in a dorm room about philosophy.
Well, I mean, I think that's what made this such an interesting story, is that this is a small group that was a stand-in for like many, many larger groups across the country, including the Democratic Party, because you have this progressive arm and what might be considered a more centrist arm, and they're each trying to push each other towards their own direction. And in that process, both of them are making perhaps some really good points, and some of them are also maybe going about those points in a way that angers the other group. And then it just becomes this complete impasse. And some people felt very caught in the middle. And on the further ends of the spectrum, instead of working together to find a solution, they split into two separate groups, actually.
Let's talk about before the split, though, because the things you quote people calling each other, this is how fascism happens, things like that, is pretty amazing. Talk to me about what you were thinking, and talk to me about what you were thinking as you read them.
Sure. I mean, it got really heated. I was watching this all play out first as a parent, and then, my reporter brain switched on pretty quickly as I thought of the ways that this could become a stand-in for these larger conversations. And so watching it all play out and the way that people ended up talking to each other, people who are neighbors and whose kids go to school together, it speaks to the ways that when we are using something like social media, we maybe perhaps say things that we wouldn't say in person to somebody. It got very heated to the point where one person confessed to, in the other side chat, calling the president of the group a dictator. People were openly accusing other people of lying. It was very messy.
At one point, the president says, hey, she's being accused of not supporting immigrant neighbors. And she says, oh, we support immigrants in whatever other ways. And then she's accused of being patronizing and assuming that everyone on the chat is not an immigrant.
Well, so that was a messy issue because she was trying to think of something that was within the group's mission and wheelhouse. And, as people were saying, we need to put forth a statement about this group's values and how it supports immigrants and what it's going to do about the National Guard being in our neighborhood. She suggested instead to make an Instagram reel about how much the families of Petworth love their nannies, which deeply offended many of the people in the group because it perhaps presumed that Latino women were present in this group only as nannies. It was very offensive to a lot of people and caused an immediate outroar from the group. And Megan, the president, later apologized for that, saying that she was thinking off the cuff and didn't mean to imply that.
Fun fact about me is that I'm a pretty big nerd. I was so into the X-Files in junior high that I had an X-Files themed birthday party with a cake that said, "The truth is out there." So if you are like me, and by that I mean if you are someone that is still bummed that Fox canceled the show Firefly and lives for all things pop culture, AwesomeCon is for you. AwesomeCon is coming to DC, and this is one, trust me, that you do not want to sleep on. March 13th through March 15th at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center, AwesomeCon is bringing together one of the most incredible stacked lineups I have ever seen. You've got folks like Oscar nominee Paul Giamatti. Yes, that Paul Giamatti. My personal idol, Gillian Anderson, my queen from the X-Files, George Takei, Misha Collins, Adam Savage, Ron Perlman, and so many more fan favorites will also be there. With tabletop and video gaming all weekend, a book fair, an artist showcase, and the family-friendly AwesomeCon Junior, there is truly something for everyone. 3 days, legends everywhere. You don't want to miss it, trust me. Buy your badges now at awesomecon.com.
Hey, I don't know about you, but I think we are super lucky in DC to have so many niche cultural events to enjoy. Like, for instance, a full event celebrating the indigenous art of porcupine quill work. The Art of Quill Work Family Day, hosted by the National Museum of the American Indian, is running Saturday, March 14th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. There'll be live artist demonstrations, guided tours, and hands-on exploration with a museum educator to deepen your understanding of this incredible art form. Families can also stop by the Imaginations Activity Center, where you'll discover how deer hide becomes clothing and accessories, and even design your own rawhide artwork inspired by the museum's collection. Best of all, it is completely free. Visit americanindian.si.edu or follow @SmithsonianNMAI for full event details. We'll see you there.
Hi, I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, a podcast network that includes this show you're listening to, and also 12 other CityCasts in 12 other cities. And each one knows their city as well as your local team knows yours. So isn't it time we connected them? Don't you want to know how they're tackling their bike lane problems and housing challenges and sidewalk dog poop crises? That's why I'm hosting a new podcast called Your City Could Be Better. Because it could be. Every week, I'll chat with a different host in our CityCast network about what their cities are doing right and wrong, the weird things they're trying, and the surprising successes, so that we can all learn how to make our cities a little bit better. Listen to Your City Could Be Better on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, what did you think? You're in this group, you have a new baby, or not so new anymore, but you had a new baby. Do you think that a parenting group chat that you join needs to show its values about everything?
You know, as a reporter, I wanted to stay out of it entirely because once I knew that I was going to report on it, I was not going to participate in the conversation. But it was really interesting talking to some of the people who were kind of in the middle of this, who felt like both sides were making really good points and maybe going about it in the wrong way. I think that's what makes it a really interesting story, is that there is a lot of moral ambiguity in here. Some people really felt like all of their spaces had to be coming out very forcefully against what the Trump administration was doing. Whereas other people felt like, you know, I keep my activism spaces separately. Like, I'm in Free DC, I'm in some other group, and I want this space to just be the space where I go when I want to find out, you know, where my kid can take gymnastics classes, for example.
It's interesting that you keep using the word space, which implies, like, I think, a sense of greater ownership and reflection on you than, you know, if this was pre-social media and people were just subscribing to a parenting magazine and it was a sort of a one-way flow of information. I don't think they would think of it that way. They would just think, you know, this is a product I'm buying in order to get some helpful tips.
Yeah, but these are very interactive groups. This is a WhatsApp community, which has like dozens and dozens of subgroups, both of them, both Peanuts and Parenting and Community, as the free range group was later renamed. They have different spaces for parents who have kids of different ages, for parents of multiples, for parents who are interested in certain types of like activities even, or who speak different languages. So they really are communities that you join rather than something that you just passively consume.
So at one point, the board of the organization, Petworth Peanuts, talks about how we need to be neutral. As you write, everyone quickly agreed this was a very bad thing to have said. Why?
I mean, it brings up the question of what even is neutral these days. What is neutral about vaccines? What is neutral about school libraries or curriculums, IVF? These things are very difficult to even describe as possibly being neutral in this society today. So neutral is a bad word. Both groups, that is the one thing that they could agree on, was that neutral is not a word that belongs in this space.
So this group then, it splits. The new group that began as free range pretty quickly develops the same sort of set of advice about parenting issues as the old group. Is there any discernible difference in what kind of advice is offered?
Well, I'm actually I'm not in the groups. I'm not an active participant in the groups, so I can't really say for sure about the types of parenting advice that's being offered. But the activities that they do are pretty different because parenting in community, one of their first big projects was to organize a vigil for Renee Good after she was killed, and that's not something that Petworth Peanuts could or would do under their policies.
So basically, by the end of the story, you had this group with, like, I think you said 1,000 members, and then it has become two groups, each with about 500 members. And I would venture to say that the 1,000 new Petworth parents, one of the bluest neighborhoods, as you write, and one of the bluest cities in the country, those people have a lot in common, those 1,000 people. And yet you write about this dynamic that caused even this group that by the standards of our whole country is like incredibly close to split into two.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows you how passionately people feel about issues of parenting and issues of politics. And I think it's also a very particularly DC type of thing, too, because so many of these parents work in politics or work in spaces where they have to be apolitical in a sense. People who have security clearances, for example, were concerned about the group becoming more politicized. So
Wait, they were legitimately worried that they would lose their security clearance because they're in a parenting group chat with somebody else who has views that the national security state might not like?
there were people who, this was one of the reasons that was cited for keeping the group from becoming more of an advocacy group, is that some people, were people who got doged and hoped to return to the federal government and didn't want to be seen as political organizers in some way. There were people who said that they worried about their visas upon leaving and re-entering the country. These are some of the reasons that were cited for keeping the group apolitical. But then there are people in the parenting and community group who say, well, I'm an immigrant also, and I feel like I have to speak out in any way possible. To which then the other group counters, well, I'm glad that you have that privilege, but not everyone has that privilege.
Maura, you're making my brain hurt.
I'm just relaying what was in the group. So yeah. It was really a very circular back and forth where, it made me wonder if this group would have ended up splitting or separating in some other way anyway, because of this seemed to be such an impasse for people. And even though they have so much in common and likely did vote the same way in most of the recent elections, we are seeing these small divisions pop up in groups around the country. And I should also say that Peanuts is not the only group that has had issues with this. There was an Upper East Side moms group that had a complete meltdown over the mayoral election. Another group in Michigan also had to ban talk about Israel, Palestine, because it was causing issues in their own mom group as well. So, these issues that seem like maybe on the face have nothing to do with parenting have crept into parent groups all across the country.
I'm curious how much of the acrimony, how much the division, how widely spread was it, or how much was it driven by a few people who feel particularly passionately one way or the other?
There was certainly, a core group on each side, a core group that has formed the leadership of parenting and community, as well as there's the leadership of Peanuts. But people were chiming in all throughout this, people whose names I had maybe previously not even seen on the chat, people who felt compelled to speak up even having not really been much of a participant, more of a lurker in the group, it really brought out strong opinions in people throughout the several months that this went on.
I'm curious what the reaction has been. You were part of this community. You didn't sort of parachute in as a reporter to do this story. You see this kind of pathology going on in front of you. You wrote, to my read, a pretty down the middle story, but as reporters know, no one's ever really happy with what you write about them. What kind of response have you gotten from your neighbors?
No one has seemed upset with me. And I tried really faithfully to represent both sides of these groups. And a lot of the reaction I've gotten from people, from readers who are hearing about this for the first time, sometimes have been saying that they aren't sure which side they want to be on. They see that both sides are making really good points. In terms of how it's playing in the neighborhood, both groups, to me, at least the impression that they've given to me is that they felt like they were fairly portrayed, and that, these divisions are still cutting pretty deep. People still have really hurt feelings about how all of this played out on both sides. And
so has this translated into offline behavior? Are friendships severed? Do people, turn their backs on each other at the farmer's market or whatever y'all do in the neighborhood?
Well, I should add, first of all, I actually don't live in Petworth. I live nearby, but I don't live in Petworth. So
you're just lurking on the parenting.
Well, I joined this group because my neighborhood didn't have a parent group, and I'm within walking distance of Petworth. Okay. And so it was kind of like the best game in town when you're like a new parent. It's so right. Organized, and I've made great friends through the group, none of whom were in the story. It's a really well organized group, and I think there are lots of people actually from other neighborhoods who join it just because it is so it's such a big organization. In terms of how it's playing out, I have heard that there has been some weirdness from people. Another interesting dynamic is that there's a faction of people who are in both groups too, actually. So, that 500-500 split, some of those are people who have joined both groups because they identify with both of them and attend events for both of them too.
That DC Urban Moms listserv also has a tendency to break down into like incredibly nasty, noxious interpersonal treatment. Is this just the anonymous nature of social media in general, or is there something about parenting that brings this out in people?
I mean, parenting is so emotional. And as a new parent, as someone who has just given birth, you are adjusting to this new life. You're getting to know a new person. You are one thing I always compared it to often when I was first starting out in the Petworth Peanuts groups with my newborn is that it kind of feels like the first week of college where it's like, okay, I'm here in this new life and like I'm going to make new friends because I have a kid and I want my kid to be friends with other kids that are their age. And the group has been great at that. I've totally succeeded in that. But it is a very insecure time, I would say. You always wonder if you're doing something right. Could you be doing it better? Could I be a better mom in some way? And people have strong opinions about what makes a good mom. I shouldn't just say mom, but parents. These groups are heavily female dominated. And so I think that is this really interesting mix that can also make emotions extremely heightened about all things parenting.
Maura, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.